ways and efficient modes of public transit, we're making a better way of life the destination for all of us.
Coming up next on Nevada Week in Review, we'll talk to a university regent about the legacy of resigning Chancellor Jane Nichols. We'll find out about the power blackout at the Bellagio and its financial impact on the hotel. And we'll have the latest on Mayor Oscar Goodman's ethics problems. That's all coming up next on Nevada Week in Review.
Welcome to Nevada Week in Review, where newsmakers and journalists discuss the issues and examine the stories behind the headlines. And now here is your host, Mitch Fox.
Before I begin, I'd like to introduce the media panel. First off, Michael Squires of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Emily Richmond of the Las Vegas Sun, Rod Smith of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, and Steve Reese, freelance journalist for Newsweek magazine and the Boston Globe. We're going to start off with the resignation of Chancellor Jane Nichols, and joining me on the phone right now is Regent Steve Sisolak. Hello, Mr. Sisolak.
Hello, Mitch. How are you this evening?
I'm doing fine. How about yourself?
Pretty well, thank you very much.
Some pretty big news this week. The Chancellor announces her resignation for health reasons. Many people are believing that this is the reason, even though she's had quite a controversial tenure. What do you think she'll be remembered for?
Well, I hope she's remembered for her entire tenure, not just the last 6 months of her tenure. I think that her period as a chancellor has been filled with some very high peaks and some very low valleys. And I hope that people judge her over the entirety of her tenure as opposed to just the last few months.
Well, the last months, as you know, has consisted of the demotions of CCSN President Ron Remington and lobbyist John Cummings and the Wendell Williams, Bridget Jones scandal. I mean, do you think that this situation will kind of stick to her even as she's leaving?
I think, unfortunately, it's the latest things that have happened to her, along with the tuition overcharges for the students. I mean, lately we've had some real issues that have faced the Regents, and it's unfortunate if that's all that people remember, because there were a lot of great things, I think, that happened under Jane's tenure. I mean, we had the best funding has ever come out of the Nevada legislature last time around. The Henderson State College, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, was the major thing for this system. The dental school and so forth and so on. There's been a lot of construction, capital construction in the system. So I think there are a lot of positive contributions she made as well.
Okay, what do you think the Regents are going to be looking for to head up the system now? What kind of individual are you going to be looking for?
Well, what I'm looking for is, first off, I'd like to do something very quickly. I think, we're in a difficult situation, difficult time right now. We're going to be going into the legislature in about 10 months. We can't wait for the 6 months for several reasons. One is it's not fair to Jane. She is suffering from Meniere's disease, which is very, very difficult for her to deal with. And the travel has become very, very difficult for her. I'm looking personally, I'd rather look to the business community. I mean, get someone that maybe can come in with a little bit stronger hand to business sense as opposed to having to look at the academic world again. Maybe get someone of the business community that's familiar with running large corporations, large companies, and bring some of that common sense and business approach to the university system.
Okay, Mr. Sisolak, thank you for joining us tonight.
Mitch, thanks an awful lot.
Okay, let's go on to our next issue, and that has to do with the blackout at the Bellagio. Take a look at this.
We had come here initially to see the exhibit from Monet. It's my favorite. So we were very happy that it opened up. We leave tomorrow, so we made it.
Diana and Sean Fell even picked up some Monet souvenirs to remember this historic Bellagio visit.
Fortunate, and I'm sure they lost a boatload of money, but we weren't affected. We'd probably, if we'd been registered as guests here and had to be shuttled elsewhere, be a little unhappy, but I'm sure they would have comped us in some way.
But stores like Tiffany were happy to see paying customers after the 4-day power outage. 6 of the restaurants here at the Bellagio were not able to open up by Thursday afternoon, but many, like Olive's, will be open by Thursday night. And that's because it takes a lot more preparation to get a restaurant up and running again.
Restaurants all had to restock, and then in addition to restocking, especially as you get into the gourmet rooms or a restaurant like the buffet, there's a tremendous amount of prep work that has to go in. You have sauces to make, stocks to make, a variety of pre-cooking that needs to be done on certain items.
As patrons are eager to get back into the gourmet restaurants and oogle in the high-end boutiques, County building inspectors, along with Nevada Power and Bellagio engineers, will try to figure out how this power outage occurred. They will study computer records to pinpoint the cause.
Okay, they're saying, quote, an unknown event caused this blackout, and I guess the Clark County building inspector is still investigating it, but basically the inspector said that this could happen to any resort at any time, considering the fact that how much was lost? Is it like $3 million a day was lost over the?
It's at least $3 million a day. It's a conservative estimate out of Wall Street. Alan Feldman, throwing numbers around in a conversation with Steve yesterday or the day before, I think, threw out $50 million as a possible figure. I believe he did, and said it still wouldn't be material to a company that size. An unexplained event is sort of getting to be standard language for MGM Mirage. They're sort of the gang that can't shoot straight these days. First, they have 14,000 currency transaction reports that they can't get filed with the federal government. Then they have Siegfried and Roy go dark and they can't get an act in the theater for 8 or 9 months. And now they've got a blackout for 4 days. There were a lot of disgruntled customers over there before they opened the other night. That's not going to be the lasting effect, really. The lasting effects are the financial implications for MGM Mirage, which could be quite large, and also most of the new hotels are designed the same way as far as the electrical systems. Any of them could be hit the same way, and it underscores our vulnerability, the vulnerability of the local economy, both to random events like this seems to have been in its beginning, or possible terrorist attacks. I mean, this was one small random event off in the middle of some cables around the outside of Bellagio. Suppose somebody had a diabolical plan to hit a number of the transformers that supply our major industry with power. We could be down for weeks or months while they're looking for the cables and so on and so forth. And an investigation is underway by the company and by the county, and we're supposed to start getting some answers this coming week.
This is pretty big news, though. I mean, it was on all the major newscasts and major newspapers.
It was a big story. I mean, whenever a casino in Las Vegas goes down, it's a big story. I think that certainly the Bellagio is very, very famous. And, you know, I had one of my folks I was talking to was saying, this is like Ocean's 11, only with a much, much less attractive cast. It was a really strange event where you know, the Bellagio just kind of went down, and the thing about it was that I started calling the Bellagio's, the MGM Mirage folks about noon on Sunday, and at that point they didn't seem to think it was a big deal. I said, what's the big deal? It's just a couple of hours, and I didn't know it was going to go for 3.5 days, but certainly it seemed to me like just the scene in and of itself was bizarre. The surveillance cameras not working in the casino, the slot machines down, everybody being sent home, people not being able to come into their hotels. There was one story, the RJ reported that, which is unbelievable, where a bride on her wedding day stepped outside of a hotel and her father was having some sort of respiratory distress in the lobby and she couldn't get back inside. I mean, it was a really bizarre situation. I think the MGM Mirage took a very long time to figure out just how big a deal it was.
Now, the property is going to pay all of the wage earners, the hourly people, full pay for those 3.5 days. Is that correct?
At least through Tuesday.
Which I think is a PR move that I mean, it's certainly, you know, of good intentions, I'm sure, but it also brings back that issue of Siegfried and Roy and how the ancillary people who were working on the show got nothing and lost, you know, got a couple of days of severance and that was it. There were hundreds of people who lost their jobs at that time, I believe, and it wasn't necessarily MGM Mirage's fault, but they did certainly take the image hit on that as well.
Their initial decision was not to pay the workers, and then they changed their mind through the course of a board meeting on Tuesday and decided to pay them at least through the end of the day on Tuesday. They didn't know how big the problem was during the day Sunday that Steve is talking about. The Gaming Control Board officials and county officials both say that well into Tuesday afternoon there were MGM Mirage officials scurrying around thinking that they could keep the hotel open and that maybe they wouldn't have to shut down for the night.
It was also, I mean, you're talking about how big a story it was. It was a big story because it was colorful and it was weird. I mean, you know, you had all of these major fancy restaurants that had all this food they had to just do something with. So all the employees who were stuck working there were eating like kings for days. The police dogs were bathing in the swimming pools. It was a really, really strange image that comes to mind of the most one of the most famous and fanciest hotels in the city.
One of the most popular. We talked about other properties. What Harrah's Rio is getting its own combustion turbine power plant. A lot of these properties, as I understand it, are trying to get self-sufficient in terms of generating their own power. But wasn't that kind of the problem, or what? We really don't know what was the problem. They're saying that if it was a Nevada power line, there might have been a different scenario. This was a hotel line, allegedly. Do we have any of that sorted out yet?
Nevada Power is very certain it wasn't their fault. They say that over and over again. That day, on Sunday, one of the reasons why I was concerned and thought it was a bigger story than it might have appeared was because everything that MJ Mirage had to tell me, I ended up proving not true. So, you know, they were saying Nevada Power was on hand, they were fixing the problem, and they weren't. And so the implication that they didn't know what was really happening and still don't really know what exactly went wrong is, I think, a pretty big problem for the company. On the other hand, it kind of sobers you to remember that, you know, $3 million a day, and it doesn't even make a blip on it. And it just kind of gives you some context for just how enormous and wealthy this corporation is.
Yeah. All right, let's go on to the next story, and that has to do with Mayor Oscar Goodman. Take a look at this.
We've seen him as the happiest mayor in the world, but lately we've also seen another side.
And when I'm being told by envious, jealous little people.
And today...
I lost my temper the other day, okay? And I don't want to lose my temper again. I have a very bad temper. I see it as a fault, and I'm trying to be a nice, kind, gentle mayor today.
But Mayor Oscar Goodman made it clear he would not answer any questions regarding his upcoming hearing on ethics violations.
I'm not going to put myself in a position where my answers will be misconstrued and played with. I will testify in front of the Ethics Commission, and at the end of the day, I will be exonerated.
One of the violations the mayor is accused of stems from his deal to be the spokesperson for Bombay Sapphire Gin. Half the money from the deal went to the city of Las Vegas. The other half, $50,000, was donated to the Meadows School. A video of the event in 2002 was made and sent to numerous national media outlets.
City workers shot and then duplicated videotapes here at the city's video services department. The cost, $890. The city's PR department billed the mayor's office.
Goodman doesn't believe his offers ever received a bill. If the city was not reimbursed, that means taxpayers paid for it. We asked Goodman if he was okay with that.
In my opinion, to get millions of dollars worth of publicity for Las Vegas, and that's what we're all about, I think it was money well spent.
Goodman plans on consulting with several lawyers before he goes before the state board, but he still plans on representing himself.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the tone of the news conferences. The mayor scheduled these weekly news conferences, sort of a dialogue between he and the Las Vegas news media and anybody else that would like to show up. The tone's changed a little bit then, hasn't it?
They'd even let you in, Mitch. You could go and...
Amazing, yeah. Even now.
The tone certainly has changed since the ethics complaints were forwarded to the full commission. It's a much more tense atmosphere. A week ago, he walked out after just a few minutes, probably the shortest one, certainly that I've ever witnessed. And then this week, it was a tense back and forth between the mayor and the media.
Now, he has given interviews to television news broadcasts. I know I shouldn't start naming because I'm sure I'm going to leave someone out, but I saw at least 3 of the commercial news broadcasts had rather lengthy interviews with him. And then what did he say at the news conference?
Well, even Thursday morning he was on the air with one of the local news stations talking about some of the accusations. And but when he's at the press conference, he's saying, well, I don't want the media to misconstrue what I'm saying. He just wants to have this live feed directly to the public without any filter from apparently the print media.
So it's amazing. He believes that the print reporters like yourself are the adversaries and the TV news journalists aren't?
Well, I mean, it would appear so. He didn't state it in those words, but yeah, I mean, he said that he likes TV because he can just get his message out directly.
Okay, what about the allegations? We talked a little bit about this last week, but one involves his son's business and how the mayor allegedly used his position in Washington, D.C. during the U.S. Conference of Mayors to promote that business.
That's the central complaint, right, is the iPolitics party, whether he, used his influence, his title as mayor to coerce people into going to this party where his son's business is going to be showing its product to politicians in Washington.
Now, what about the Bombay gin? How's that playing out?
Well, there are a couple of things there. I mean, primarily they're trying to see who actually benefited. He was paid $100,000 to be the pitchman. We just saw the footage there of the kickoff party. His wife's, the school where his wife, that his wife is involved with, I should say, he says that she doesn't receive a cent for involvement there, and I'm sure there'll be testimony to that effect before the Ethics Commission, but that's part of it. Also, the documents that they requested this week, as that piece noted, show that the city employees were paid overtime, that they worked to put this video news release out to send it to the national media.
Now, he says his office was never billed, so who picked up the tab?
Well, taxpayers do, ultimately. If it's not something that's going to air on Channel 2, which is the city's TV station, then they're billed for it. So they were billed for it, the documents show, indicating it wasn't something that would be run-of-the-mill government TV fare, and I think you could probably see why by watching the video. I mean, the mayor dancing on a stage with Charo, and that's not really, you know, government TV fare.
You know, we have a national journalist with us tonight. I've got to ask you, do you get a lot of requests to do stories, to do another angle on Mayor Goodman? Is the national media really interested in the Las Vegas mayor?
The national media loves the quotes from Mayor Goodman. This particular scandal thus far hasn't really broken out. There's been some report on the wires of the ethics case. I think that as it gets closer to the ethics case, I'm sure I'll do a piece for some of the newspapers, mostly because he is a colorful figure and people just love hearing from him. And to be honest with you, as a journalist, you know, and I know John Ralston will kill me for saying it, but I love quoting him. He's incredibly quotable, and it is a trick sometimes to make sure that you're quoting something that is true, because he does say a lot of things. But you know, he is in a lot of ways exactly what the rest of the country thinks Las Vegas is.
You know, colorful and quotable is probably very nice, but frankly, as a voter, I think the mayor's got it backwards. And one of the things that I would think we would all find troubling is that almost every week, for almost as long as I can remember, ethics has been an issue on this program. And it's because people like the mayor have it backwards. He serves in elective office. It's a public trust. We gave him a trust. We expect him to behave ethically. And he treats the issue as though if we can't prove he's done something wrong, then it's fine. He can get away with it. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. There shouldn't be a question as to whether our elected officials are behaving ethically or not. He says a bill hasn't been sent, and everybody goes scurrying to prove that a bill was sent. There shouldn't be an issue about the mayor of one of the largest cities in the United States behaving this way.
Well, I think the way the mayor looks at it, though, I think he looks at it as at himself getting nickeled and dimed for, you know, $900 for this. He went on CNN, he went on, you know, Crossfire, Lou Dobbs show to do that, and he thinks, well, you know, that's how much in publicity for the city, and the city, you know, thrives on people knowing that Vegas is out here and it's a fun place and it's got a fun mayor. So in his defense, I mean, that's how he views it himself.
Well, that's one way.
I'm not saying that Rod's, you know, concerns aren't legitimate, but you know, from his perspective, that's what he's.
But that's one way he views it. But the other way is phenomenally arrogant. He stands up in front of this press conference the other day and says, "I'm going to run the city the way I want to run the city." He wasn't elected to do that. He was elected to run the city the way we want him to run the city.
Well, I think also the other issue is that these scandals have been sort of accumulating. For a long time he was just sort of colorful and odd, and there wasn't anything to sort of hang, you know, John Ralston's grudge on. And now now there's a lot to hang his grudge on, and you know, it becomes more and more clear that you know, John saw something that was probably true and probably there, and a lot of other folks in the media, you know, because he's colorful and he's quotable, laid off or didn't dig in on it, and you know, now it's feeding time.
You can see he's toned down. He's not the angry mayor that was out there saying he was going to be in the Ethics Commission's face. I mean, after Friday, going into Monday when he gave that kind of soft focus interview on Channel 8 and then some of the other interviews, you can tell he's kind of changing his approach to, you know, how he wants his persona to be as he goes into this hearing.
But he's also not the happiest mayor in the world anymore, and I think that after all this is said and done, whether or not he gets in trouble with the Ethics Commission or not, I think that his image has changed. I think it will be changing quite a bit for the public.
Okay, we might add the Ethics Commission will meet May 12th and 13th to hear this case. So we will we will be talking about it on this show for sure. Let's go on to the next issue, and that has to do with the Clark County School District education budget. Take a look at this.
In the fall, an estimated 12,000 additional children will squeeze into the Clark County School District, which is already busting at the seams.
The most challenge is the fact that we have so many children that come into one classroom at one time.
That's why Karen Vassallo, who teaches second grade at James B. McMillan, hopes the district hires more teachers to reduce class sizes. She also wants the district to hire more computer specialists like Nancy Burns.
Everywhere we go, computers are being used.
Right now, most of us in the Northwest have 3 schools to cover.
But I wish I could say that it's a budget that's going to reduce class size, that it's going to bring in full-day kindergarten, and also give some good raises to our teachers and administrators. But it's not that good of a budget.
In fact, Superintendent Carlos Garcia says the additional $152 million is barely enough to cover the district's growth. $58 million will go to staff the 25 new schools opening during the next 2 years and hire more specialty teachers like computer specialists district-wide. $43 million is for employee raises, and $10 million will be used to hire teachers for at-risk schools.
This is the best budget that we've had in 4 years.
But Garcia says it's still not enough to meet every need.
To reduce class size by 1 student in our district costs $12 million.
Okay, before we start the discussion, in the interest of full disclosure, we might add this station is licensed to the Board of Trustees of the Clark County School District. So on that note, let's start and dissect this budget a little bit. $1.6 billion, what does it include?
Well, it includes everything the district says it needs to run the schools, which next year will be over 300 for the 2004-2005 academic year.
Let's go detail by detail. One of the more controversial sections, and had trouble with some of the trustees, was the hiring of 3 assistant superintendents. Tell us about that.
Well, the school district, the board agreed on just about every point of this budget, and it is a massive budget. It's about $152 million more than they spent for this current school year. But the sticking point was something that amounts to just about $300,000 in salaries. That's 3 additional administrative positions. It passed on a 4-3 vote. It goes back to the board again in May. And before that time, they want the school district staff to come to them with a full presentation explaining the reasons why they want those administrators. And that's as much, I think, about saving face as it is getting the facts out to the public. The school district has had this perception for a long time that it's top-heavy, bloated, heavy with administrators. The school district says it's not true. About 3.5% of their budget goes to administrative costs compared with over 5% nationally. But the truth is the district, since they reorganized into the 5 regions, has grown by more than 55,000 students. And they've added maybe 50 additional schools. The district is saying they need more administrators to help keep those schools going.
And so do the math, 300,000 for a budget of $1.6 billion.
Yeah, it seems like pennies, but it's interesting when we talk about Oscar Goodman just a minute ago and how he didn't think that $900 was a pretty big deal. I think that the argument about the administrators for some of the board members is as much about principle as it is about the dollar amount. They don't want the public to perceive them as just randomly hiring administrators, especially when they're saying there's no money for teacher salary increases, when there's no money to reduce class sizes. What the budget does contain, though, is a couple of other interesting things that passed easily. Things like the conservation program. The district saved $4.2 million last year by cracking down and just checking out schools in the middle of the night. They actually drive around and see who's left the lights on and find those schools. And schools that save the most money over the year get money back. And the district is going to be expanding that conservation program with the current budget.
You also said that they were to work a little bit on per pupil spending. That was increased in addition to computer specialists.
That's right. As you remember, during the height of the legislative logjam, they actually decided to cut the educational computer specialists who go into the schools, teach teachers how to use technology and how to work with students, and sent those specialists back to regular classroom positions. They've been reinstated. They're actually increasing the number of teachers that are going to hold those positions. That's critical for the district in the coming year because, as you know, with No Child Left Behind, accountability, standards, benchmarks, all the buzzwords, all of that goes online next year.
But they still were not able to reduce class size in upper grades.
No, and unfortunately the district is saying that's something they're not going to be able to do without legislative help. They can only stretch the dollars as far as they can. Another thing that's going to be coming on next year is an opportunity for the district to have the tuition kindergarten program, where children go to kindergarten for a full day and their parents actually pay $300 a month for the benefit. It raises some interesting questions, of course, about where the district fits in and when they start charging for programs like that, but they say, look, our budget just doesn't allow us to do it for free.
Do they intend to ask the legislature to fund full-day kindergarten then?
I think that's something you're going to see a big push for, and it's something they did have the full support of Governor Gwynn during his State of the Union address right before the last legislative session. They pushed it hard, and I think the State Board of Education is behind that as well.
Okay, we are out of time. It's been a great discussion. Glad to have you on this edition of Nevada Week in Review, and I'd like to thank you for joining us as well. See you next week. Good night.